Kia ora, good morning everyone, Rich Wong here. Welcome back to the channel. If you are a Fujifilm shooter and want a super telephoto lens, you really should check out this new Tamron 150 to 500mm super telephoto zoom lens. This lens was originally designed for the full-frame Sony E-mount cameras, but now it is released for the Fuji X mount, and I think this actually make it an even better lens than the original release, and I will explain to you why in this review. I just want to quickly show you some photos to show you how much zoom this Tamron 150 to 500mm lens can give you. So here is the first photo that I shot with my Fujifilm 23mm f2.WR lens. So that's approximately 35mm equivalent focal length. I really like this focal length myself because I find the angle of view really close to the human vision. And now this is a photo that I shot with the Tamron 150 to 500 lens at 150mm focal length. And I have highlighted the corresponding area in the photo shot with the 23mm focal length lens. And here is a photo shot at 500mm focal length using the Tamron lens. And the red rectangular box in the 23mm focal length photo show you the corresponding area. This is 750mm equivalent focal length, so that is a really long focal length. So anyway, now I hope you have a better idea how much zoom this Tamron lens can provide, and let's have a look at the image sharpness now. We'll start from the wide and 150mm focal length, and if we look at the center of the photo at f5, the maximum aperture, the center is already very sharp, and the center sharpness remains excellent until we stop down to around f11. At f16, the center sharpness starting to become a little bit softer due to diffraction, and at f22, which is the minimum aperture, the center is noticeably softer. And let's look at the corner at 150mm focal length now. At f5, the corner is surprisingly sharp already. I actually thought I made a mistake with my photo, so I double-checked the EXIF data, and indeed, this sample photo was shot at f5 at 150mm focal length. Because of that, stopping down the lens doesn't really make much noticeable difference in terms of corner sharpness. I have to stop down the lens to f16, then the corner starting to become softer due to diffraction. And now let's look at the test photos that I shot at 500mm focal length. If we zoom in the center, at the maximum aperture, which is now f6.7 at 500mm focal length, the center is quite sharp, but I won't say it is excellent, and contrast appears to be a teeny tiny bit lower than what it could be. But once I stop down the lens to f8, then the center sharpness now becomes very good. The image would become slightly softer from f16 onwards due to diffraction. And let's have a look at the corner now. At f6.7, the corner sharpness is surprisingly good again. It's really quite sharp for a super telephoto zoom lens shot at its maximum focal length, and my subject is also quite far away as well. Stopping down the lens doesn't really make much difference in terms of corner sharpness. The image from the lens is definitely very usable even at the maximum aperture from the center to corner, no matter you shoot at the wide end or the telephoto end. One big reason why the lens is so sharp from the center to the corner is because this lens was originally designed as a full-frame lens, but now when used on a Fujifilm camera, we are using the more center area of the lens, so that's why even the corner of this lens is so sharp without even stop down the lens at all. From the previous test results, we know that this Tamron lens is a pretty sharp lens from the center to the corner. However, for a super telephoto lens like this Tamron to get sharp photo, the ability to keep the lens steady is arguably more important than the sharpness of the lens itself. If you can't keep the camera steady, then it is impossible to get any sharp photo no matter how sharp the lens is, and it is really hard to keep the lens that can reach 750mm equivalent focal length steady. Luckily, This lens has the VC feature, which is the optical image stabilization. Now, I cannot find the official figures of how effective this optical image stabilization system is, but the test that I did myself at 500mm focal length, I took a few hundred photos at different shutter speed with and without VC enabled. I found the VC is about 4 stops effective, which is pretty impressive, and it is one of the best results that I have ever got. Without VC, at 500mm focal length, about half of the photo that I shot at 1/250 shutter speed are already not sharp. But when I turn on VC, even when the shutter speed is at 1/30th second, the majority of the photos are still sharp, so that is quite a big difference. And here is a video that I shot at 150mm with the VC turned off. I didn't know my hand is actually so shaky, but now I turn on VC and the video is much more stable. And here is one more example, but this time I shot at 500mm the maximum focal length. And again, without VC, the footage is just so shaky, almost make me want to puke. And if I turn on VC, it is much better. So the optical image stabilizer doesn't only allow you to minimize blur or shaky movement in your photo or video, it also makes it a lot easier for you to frame your photo. If you look at my 500mm sample video without VC, it is pretty much impossible to frame the photo precisely because of so much shake. And because of that, there are 3 different operation modes for the VC, and one of them is for framing priority. This lens uses Tamron's VXD autofocus motor, which is a linear autofocus motor. I find the autofocus speed quite fast when shooting on a bright sunny day. It is very quiet and the autofocus operation is very smooth as well. However, because the maximum aperture of this lens is f5 to f6.7, so the autofocus performance is affected quite noticeably, and the autofocus speed can become quite slow when there's not enough light. To be fair, it is mostly because of the camera's autofocus performance would drop when there's not enough light, and it would be the same if you use another lens that has similar maximum aperture. But I thought I should point it out in case you are thinking of buying this lens and want to use it to shoot under low light. And let's have a look at this lens vignetting performance, and this is pretty easy because if you have a look at the photos that I shot at 150mm focal length, there's virtually no vignetting even at the maximum aperture. And when we stop down the lens, there is also pretty much no difference at all. And look at the photos that I shot at the 500mm focal length, it is the same as well. No noticeable vignetting even at the maximum aperture, and the result is pretty much identical when I stop down the lens. This is probably the best vignetting performance that I have seen for quite a long time, and it is another advantage when you are using a lens that was originally designed for full frame on a APS-C camera. Let's look at this lens close-up shooting capability next. The minimum focus distance of this Tamron lens is about 60 cm at the wide and 150mm focal length and approximately 1.8 meter at the 500mm telephoto end. And you got pretty impressive 0.32 times maximum magnification ratio at the wide end and 0.27 times at the telephoto end. So this is the test photo that I shot at the wide end at the minimum focus distance. My Lego minifigure almost filled the height of this photo. Sharpness is also pretty decent as well at the maximum aperture. So while the lens cannot do the 1:1 macro photo, I think it is still a pretty good choice if you want to take some close-up photos. With such long focal length, it is very easy to dissolve the background of the photo. So when you are shooting with this lens, especially when shooting at the maximum aperture, quite often your subject would easily stand out from the background. Bokeh from this lens looks quite nice overall and not too nervous. There's only very small amount of cat's eye bokeh effect. bokeh remains pretty round from wide open to f8. From f11 onwards, we start to see bokeh balls turn into polygon shape. Next, we'll have a look at this lens chromatic aberration performance. So here are a few high contrast photos that I've shot with this lens at the maximum aperture. And look at all these photos, there is almost no color fringing at all. Even when we zoom into some very high contrast area, I still don't see any purple or green color fringing. Chromatic aberration control is definitely very impressive with this Tamron super telephoto zoom lens. Distortion wise, this Tamron lens is also almost flawless. I see very minimal amount of distortion in all my real world photos, and with these two test photos, one shot at 150mm and one shot at 500mm, I also see almost no distortion as well. In terms of lens flare control, Tamron also did a really good job with this super telephoto zoom lens. There is really minimal amount of lens flare and ghosting even when I shoot directly into the sun. Contrast also remains very good as well. There really isn't much that I can complain about this lens in terms of lens flare performance. And next, let's have a look at sunstars. From wide open to f11, sunstars is not really visible in the photo. You will need to stop down the lens to around f16. Then you can start to see sunstars, and at the minimum aperture f22, sunstars become a lot sharper, but still I won't say the sunstars are very sharp or very nice looking. This is definitely not a lens that I would choose if I want to have some nice sharp sunstars in my photos. This Tamron lens is a variable aperture zoom lens, and the maximum aperture is f5 on the wide end and f6.7 on the telephoto end. And here is a graph that shows you how the maximum aperture change when you are increasing the focal length based on the aperture value that I can see from the camera. Build quality of this Tamron 150 to 500mm lens is really good. I feel it is even better than the normal Tamron lenses, and it feels very solid. Size-wise, it is a super telephoto zoom lens that go up to 500mm, so as you can expect, it is not a small lens at all. When I mount it on my X-T3, it does feel really quite front heavy, and I feel the grip on the camera need to be quite a bit bigger to make the camera feel more balanced. But actually, the size of this lens is very similar to the Fujifilm 100 to 400 lens, but the Tamron weighs a little bit more. While the longer focal length may be why the Tamron lens is a bit heavier, I'm guessing it's mostly because this Tamron lens was originally designed for full frame cameras, while the Fuji lens was designed for APS-C sensor, so the larger image circle that the Tamron support make the lens heavier. Now, while heavier is definitely not a good news for a telephoto lens, but the good thing is, this lens corner sharpness, vignetting, and even distortion performance are all exceptionally good because we are using the best part of the image circle on a Fujifilm X camera. So it is a bit of trade-off, and personally I think it's very worth it. Now of course, Fujifilm also has the 150 to 600mm lens. While the weight of that Fuji lens is very similar to this Tamron, but the Fuji 150 to 600 is a much longer lens. It's about 100mm longer than the Tamron, so you will need quite a large camera bag to carry that Fuji lens, while with this Tamron lens, I can fit it in some of my smaller camera bag quite easily. This is a weatherproof lens, and there are multiple rubber seals around the lens to help protect the lens, and there's also fluorine coating on the front element to help keep the front element clean. The lens comes with a reversible lens hood, and the front filter thread is 82 cm. The zoom ring is at the front of the lens, and the front of the lens would extend as you zoom in. One of the things that I really like about this zoom ring is you can just push it forward to lock the focal length at that particular focal length. So yes, you can lock it at any focal length you want and it's very quick and easy. There's also a lock switch on the lens body for you to lock the lens when you are traveling, but that lock switch is only for locking the lens at 150mm focal length. Apart from the lock switch, there are 4 more switches on the body of the lens. One for you to change the VC mode between normal, panning and framing priority, and another switch is for you to turn on, turn off the VC. One switch is for you to adjust the manual focus speed, and the last switch is for you to adjust the focus limiter. The switches are the usual Tamron design, so they are quite large and very easy to use even if you have bigger fingers. Then we have the focus ring and also the tripod mount. The tripod mount has a built-in Arca Swiss mounting plate, which is fantastic. It is rotatable and also removable as well. To remove it is very easy, just unscrew it and then you can take it out without having to use any tools at all. The tripod mount is also very solid as well, and there are even 2 strap attachment holes on the mount. The only complaint I have is that there is no soft click to guide you if you want to rotate the lens to exactly portrait or landscape orientation. You have to rely on the dots on the lens to align it properly, which to be honest is not that hard, but I feel if there is a soft click, it would be much easier. Usually, a super telephoto zoom lens like this Tamron lens would have a lot of compromises, but this Tamron lens has a lot less compromises than I expected. Image quality is really good overall with no major weakness. It's jam-packed with features that makes the lens suitable not just for average consumer but can also be used by professional users as well. Autofocus performance is decent and the optical image stabilization is surprisingly good. The only real compromise I see is the maximum aperture, which is f5 to 6.7. It is good if you are shooting during the day, but if you need to use it indoor or whenever there isn't a lot of ambient light, then the autofocus performance and the image quality will both start to suffer. Now, to be clear, this is not actually an issue of this lens, and pretty much all the super telephoto zoom lens in the market would have very similar limitations, but this is pretty much the only limitations that I can see, and I want to point it out especially to those of you who haven't owned a super telephoto zoom lens before. Otherwise, I don't really have anything major I can complain about this lens, especially at such an affordable price point. Now, if you are enjoying this review, you really should also check out my Tamron 17-70 2.8 Fuji review, because that is also a really excellent lens and arguably the most versatile standard zoom lens for Fuji X camera users.